Item number 3. On August 11th, 2016, under the opportunity to address the commission by employees or others, you allege rule violations for Louisiana Constitution Article 10, 43C, regarding nominations. And you question the appointment of LSPC members by the governor or governors. And the response I have for you, this item, is at its inception, LSPC worked with the Civil Service League, a nonprofit organization, to implement a procedure by which the appropriate private colleges would be notified of vacancies on the LSPC. There was no rule established or law in existence that provided for how a private college would be notified of a vacancy or how the college would otherwise have knowledge of a vacancy on the LSPC. Dan Sullivan from the Civil Service League worked with the first executive director of the LSPC to create form letters for purposes of advising colleges and the governor of vacancies. The State Civil Service Commission follows the same procedures, and Mr. Sullivan advises the State Civil Service Commission as well. Upon information and belief, this procedure was followed until approximately 8 years ago, after which the private colleges were not notified by the executive director of the LSPC. The colleges, in turn, failed to send nominations to the governor to fill vacancies that occurred. And the governors simply made appointments in accordance with the Louisiana Constitution, Article 10, Section 43C, which provides the governor shall make an appointment if the private college fails to provide nominations. When the LSPC recently learned through Dan Sullivan of the Civil Service League of the need to notify colleges of such vacancies, LSPC adopted a rule on or about October 13, 2016, which required its executive director to timely notify colleges of any vacancy on the LSPC. Upon information and belief, LSPC has complied with that rule since that time. With regard to the vacancies that were filled over the past 8 years and before the adoption of the new rule, those vacancies were legally filled by the governor, who was required to make appointments when private colleges failed to timely submit nominations or when the private colleges ceased to exist.
You're speeding, but I don't have a speed limit sign. That's what you're saying. Basically, you're saying because the governor didn't know, so it's all right.
The only point I would make, because probably a majority of the members of this board were appointed under this system, I don't know that we're in a position to, I, for one, would abstain from voting on anything related to this because I was appointed in that same fashion that is being complained of, so I don't think I'm in a position.
As was Monica. But the reality of it is, it was still legal. There was no burden on the commission to notify the colleges. There was no legal burden on the commission to do that.
Right.
They did it as a practice up until 8 years ago. Then it stopped for whatever reason. None of us were here. Then when it was brought to our attention, not only did it start again, but we put a rule in place, so now it is a rule. But under the law, as it is, as it was, there was no burden for anybody to tell a college.
Right.
Right.
Obviously, it wasn't us making the decision because we weren't here. You know, once it was brought to our knowledge, we collectively as a commission changed the rule and made it to where it is our rule now. It's not a you should, it is a you will. So be that as it may, the governors, plural, were following the law.
Right.
Go ahead.
And following up on what Jared just said, there is a reference in the response that says that we were, and it's in the first paragraph, 3-4 lines from the bottom. It says, when LSPC recently learned through Dan Sullivan of the Civil Service League of the need to notify colleges of such vacancies. I would object to the use of the word need. There was no need to notify them until we passed the rule that now requires us to do that. There was not previously a need to do that according to the Constitution. There was simply ability of the colleges to make nominations, and if they fail to do so, there is an ability given to the governor under the Constitution to make appointments without their nomination. Now, I'm not planning on voting on this issue, but I do want to call the attention to the fact of what the Constitution does say, and it says that they have the right to make nominations. If they don't make the nominations, the governor has the right to appoint without their nominations. Now, I think it is a good thing that we now have a rule to give them notice, because as a practical matter, how will they know when there are vacancies if we don't? But it doesn't, in my opinion, although I'm not going to vote, I don't think it makes it illegal. I think it just was a flaw in the manner in which there was no notice being given, but when no nominations came, the governor still had the right under the Constitution to make the appointments.
Well,
I'm just going to say this, Dan Sullivan, he works with the Civil Service League, he runs it, and it was either the day after or 2 days after I was elected the interim chair last year. We met with him and he walked us through the process to make sure from that point on we would be compliant. And he came and spoke at one of our meetings here recently and said that we are now in compliance with the expectations of the Civil Service League, which is something I think is fantastic. But again, it wasn't a law. We just weren't following the standard procedure. And I can't explain to you why we didn't, because again, I wasn't on the board 8 years ago when we stopped following this procedure. And it didn't come to light until the last year or two. So we've done everything we can to correct that. And we're trying to self-regulate ourselves, and we passed the rules so that we would continue to comply with the expectations of the Civil Service League. But this is a relatively young board. None of us were here when we began to not follow these protocols, but they were protocols, not laws. So,
well,
am I mistaken on that?
My intent was to, if changes need to be made, we make them, and that's what's happening.
We've done
it. We did.
I'm
We did it.
perfectly satisfied.
Okay, all right, we'll get it.
Right.
Well, if you're satisfied,
We're just going to move right on to the next
Let it
one.
stand as is.
Yeah.